And we are live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen out there on the interwebs. My name is James Murua, and I'm the host of the James Murua Literary Podcast, which is now live streaming. I'm really excited to have you join us today. And today, I just have to say, this is something I've been thinking about for a bit, so I'm really excited to have our guests. Chikè Frankie Edozien is in Accra, Ghana. And Dr. Michaela Dudley is in Berlin. I hope I got that right. Yes. Berlin, Germany, not Berlin, USA. Because I know there's a Berlin in the USA somewhere. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Karibu. I hope you have a very nice time for the next 1 hour. We'll be doing this for 1 hour. So I'll start by introducing this. Yeah, I'll just start by introducing them. Hello, Frankie. Frankie is an academic, journalist. He's the author of Lives of Great Men, which is an award-winning memoir. It's the first memoir by a Nigerian that has ever been written. Hi, Frankie. Has there been another memoir of a gay Nigerian man written?
Perhaps not, but there have been other memoirs written by Nigerians. But perhaps mine is the first by an LGBT person that is dealing with nonfiction. But you know, in Nigeria's great literary canon, I think there have been stories about queer life, but primarily in fiction. But I think for nonfiction, the first full-length memoir, I was told that mine was it. I'm still a bit surprised by it, but you know, I'm surprised and not surprised at the same time, because it's difficult to tell our stories anyway.
Thank you for being on the.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on the stream. And next we have Dr. Michaela Dudley. Michaela is an artist, a columnist, a keynote speaker, a lawyer, a cabaret singer, a DJ, perhaps. That's a lot of things you're doing.
Not DJ, but I can think about it. I can think about it. Maybe we'll add that too. and a vegan. A vegan. I don't eat meat of any kind or tier products of any kind. Just wanting to put that out there too.
And you're a trans woman.
And a trans woman.
Okay, so I think you, as we start, you said you have a poem that you wanted to share as we start our discussion.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm a woman without a period, but with one hell of an exclamation mark. Emotions, I have a myriad, and each one ignites a spark. I'm trans and I'm black, with a voice as deep as my pride. I'm used to taking flack. I've got pains deep down inside. Perhaps it's my destiny. Each scar is its own tattoo. I was raised in the land of the free, in the shadow of the Liberty statue. Marsha P. Johnson was near, a stone's throw from Stonewall. I knew damn well I was queer, though I didn't understand it all. Wanting to be a girl, I read Black Boy. Was it wrong or Richard right? Discovering James Baldwin was a joy, and Giovanni's Room in the Night. Then came Larry Kramer, Dark Room Ballads and Tumult. As for the title, now the disclaimer. Faggots was not an insult. Injustice, out of justice, AIDS produced a chasm. Was it targeting just us? It was eulogy instead of orgasm. It must be said with much ado, we now have a kind of revival. Roses for the dead, the violence is true, and it's still all about survival. Oh,
well, that is wonderful, Michaela.
Thank you, guys.
How awesome to start with poetry.
Thank you. Where can we get this poem after this? If you want to just read it, because you know somebody may have missed it.
I can be putting it online, and I can be communicating that to you in the coming days. It's a new portion of my cabaret program. Due to Corona, of course, the live the live performances also in front of a live public, if you will, have been delayed. So it's given me some time between my video performances to draft some new songs and poems, and that's one of them. So it's very, very new. I've just registered it just within the last few days by the GEMA as a song. But I can be putting that out there. That's an excerpt. The whole piece is longer. I didn't want to take up the whole time, but I thought your wonderful guests might be interested in knowing a little bit about me, because I'm living here in Germany, but I originally come from the United States, and I'm turning 60 this year, so I have a lot to reflect upon. Right.
So Michaela, maybe we can start with you.
Yes.
How do you, for the purposes of us knowing a little bit about you, to make our conversation?
I'm sorry that I'm moving around a little bit. I'm trying to keep pace with the light in the room here, but I'm getting. I won't say I'm getting straight now. That'll never happen to me. But I'm getting plugged in again here, as it were. Can we say that? So I hope you can see me now again. You can
only see half your face. We can only see half your face.
Oh, wait a minute. Is it better now? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Better?
Okay.
It's better now?
Yeah, better. Just
better.
Okay.
He can turn. Is that better now?
Yes, we can see you clearly now. Please. Yeah, that's enough.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
so I'm sorry.
I mean, I'll start with saying thank you for those who've joined us. Zugiswa, Pauline, Wim Gliders on YouTube. Thank you for joining us.
Wim Gliders, I know them. Joburg, South Africa. Wonderful Instagram contacts.
Yeah. So you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? How does Michaela come from come from the USA and end up in Germany doing a cabaret and lawyering? In a nutshell, how did that journey come about?
Well, okay. I'll start at the beginning this time. I was born in 1961 in the States and grew up there, and did a lot of things. I was already alive when Stonewall happened. Think about that one. When you talk about Stonewall and you say you were alive, they look at you like you're from the Stone Age or something. But I was already alive. I was like 7, going on 8, of course. But still, it was, strangely enough, it was a pivotal moment in my youth. That was the 1960s. And you know what, fellas? The whole world was taking to the streets in the 1960s, even before flash mobs. You had demonstrations against the Vietnam War, for women's rights, for civil rights, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. You had, Woodstock in that year. You had the moon landing, the landing on the moon. And it seemed like the sky was the limit. So everyone had his or her issue at the time, and Stonewall was at the time too. And I remember seeing that on television and asking my astonished, but also astonishingly open grandmother, what does the word homosexual mean? And what did he say in television? Transsexual. And she was surprised, but she actually told me. And although I was in my pre-puberty, I still somehow felt, wow, that's interesting. They're like alternatives. Because I was, I was, as a young kid, I was dressing up, assigned, the birth as a boy, as a male upon birth. But I was dressing up as a girl secretly, using makeup, perfume, and all those kinds of things. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It's okay to do that then. And at the time, my later heroes like Marsha P. Johnson were taking to the streets with torches, not to burn anything down, but to light the way for us. I was still in the church, in the Catholic Church, igniting candles. But it was part of my life. And then exactly 10 years later, I was on the West Coast. I was living in San Francisco, the gay capital of the United States. I read the book from Larry Kramer for the first time with the title Faggots. I know it's an issue with some people, but that was the actual title of the book at the time. And it like opened up a new world. I was beginning to do my coming out, gradually. Now, not even having a foot out of the closet, maybe a small toe out of the closet, but interested. And smack bam, that was the time of the AIDS crisis. Harvey Milk had been assassinated in San Francisco, and then the next big thing was AIDS. So my big coming out, which I had been kind of pushing off anyway, I put off even more. And instead of celebration, it was like celibacy. Making a fast forward now, because I think Frankie wants to say some things too. Later in life, after studying law, I wanted to do something else. I didn't want to practice law because I found the system to be well rigged. There are a lot of wonderful attorneys practicing civil law, gay rights law, women's law, and so forth. But it wasn't for me. It was all too slow, At the time, that was the 80s. You'd have to argue in front of old white men who didn't have your set of values. What interest would they have in turning the clocks ahead? None whatsoever. It took like 40 or 50 years for basic points since Stonewall, for basic points to even be accepted. And you see how easy it is after all of these hard-earned rights. Someone like Donald Trump comes into office, makes a couple of signatures, and throws everything back. So I felt things like that coming, and it's like, hey, that's, there are other ways to express my opposition. So I chose journalism and the arts. Here in Germany, I started learning German in my youth, but that's another story. But here in Germany, I write for the Siegessäule. That is the largest LGBTQ magazine in Germany. I also write for the Taz and the Tagesspiegel. Those are two major daily newspapers. Also, they have queer topics as well, and issues of justice and intersectionality. For Missy magazine, for Rosa, and even for a vegan publication, where even there I write about queer topics. So for me, that's a chance to enter into these new domains, to present my side of the story in their language. And the other aspect is performing, cabaret, political satire with music, texts of my own. And I feel like that's my calling. I can reach more people. I can influence more people. I can give refuge to more people who are seeking a safe space. And also by the contacts with them, talking with them as a journalist or as an artist, I can learn from them too.
Thank you so much, man. So, Frankie, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you get to the point where you're writing your book, a little bit about your journalism career.
Of course. So I just, listening to Michaela talk about some of these very interesting touch points in sort of American LGBTQ history. I mean, just in her life, she has experienced Stonewall and Harvey Milk and Woodstock and all of these things. Really reinforces to me why I do what I do, why I think it's important for me as an African journalist and writer to tell our own story. I mean, here is Michaela growing up in America with everything that was problematic with being LGBTQ and realizing before the age of 10 that there were alternatives, to use her own words. In my corner of the world, we just did not have that. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm from a town on the Niger Delta. And I don't think people who were queer, in my generation at least, had the luxury of being able to play in gender fluid clothing, being able to wear makeup without having some sort of backlash at home. And so one of the things that I have always believed in, because I learned how to read in Lagos from newspapers. Even before I went to school, I knew my ABCs because my parents brought newspapers home to me. And one of the things that I knew early on was that I could make a difference in my world through storytelling. And so I became a journalist. I went to America, first of all, to try to become an actor, and that didn't work out because of my accent. So I went to journalism school. And then I had a career in political journalism, writing about government and politics in America. But even then, as an African in America, as an immigrant, I knew that our stories, the stories of Africans in America, were just basically shunted aside. And if outlets had stories about African Americans, then they were fine. They had covered the realm of Blackness. So early on, I knew that I had to do something different, which is put the focus on where I come from, this wonderful continent that's Africa, which is multidimensional, full of 50-something countries, many different peoples. But among West Africans, at least where I live now, there are some commonalities. And then the idea of being an LGBTQ person who is not seen as normal or valid in our storytelling and in our literature got to me. And so one of the things that I did was to start writing stories about us. And somehow along the line, the memoir came out because I think in very recently anyway, when there was this huge push in Uganda, in Nigeria, in Botswana, some other places, to recriminalize already marginalized LGBTQ people, especially in Nigeria, where it came out over there, the coverage of it had very, very little, if any, representation of our lives. So if you're talking about you're going to jail Nigerian queer people for 14 years for being gay or even having an association or protesting or anything like that, and you don't even have one person that you can speak to as to what their experience is. One person that perhaps isn't an activist, just a person. Mm-hmm. And the stories then were like, well, we just don't know any, and 99% of the people support this, so maybe these people aren't worth talking to. And I found that to be absurd as a journalist. You have to do better. We all have to do better. But how can we do better if we don't put our own stories out there? And so that is the genesis of what became my memoir, Lives of Great Men, because I had to, in order to tell the story of my community, I had to turn the mirror and tell my own story. And fortunately, I think that maybe at the time it may have been the first, but I think that there are other narratives that are now being told about LGBTQ life, at least here in West Africa. So in a nutshell, that's who I am. I now live in Accra, Ghana, which is a wonderful place. But at this moment is having a very, very thorny relationship with its LGBTQ people. We are seeing the use of the brute force of the state to marginalize people even more. In a country where I lived before, Ghana, and was not this overtly homophobic. There was a sort of like live and let live attitude. But what we have now is police raids on LGBTQ centers and people being afraid to be their authentic selves. And I'm not an activist, but I am a journalist and I fancy myself a writer. Limited talent, but still a writer. And the only thing I know, the only thing I can do is storytelling.
Fishing for compliments.
I'm not. I don't fish for compliments. There are things I'm good at, like,
If you're not a writer, then
and there are other things that I'm not so good at. So we are in a space where it is difficult to get our stories out because people don't see us in our humanity. And so what I try to do is to tell our stories in any way that I can, in any platform that I can.
I just wanted to zero in a bit on that story with Ghana. What happened in the last year? Because suddenly I'm hearing a bit about Ghana clamping down on homophobia, and it's kind of a new story. Is there something new that's happened that we need to know about?
So what has happened is something that happens with queer people in a place where people feel like they're tolerated. And if you decide to step out of your comfort zone and just basically say, I'm here, it rankles people. And so what happened was that a group of LGBT Ghanaians who are used to being tossed out of their homes got together and got some money and created a safe space for them. You know, they rented a place that would be an LGBTQ center that could give people job training, computer skills, cooking skills, but also have a couple of bedrooms so that if you are a young LGBT person who is outed and you have nowhere to go, you don't sleep on the streets of Accra. This is sort of like social stuff that government should be doing. But these folks did it, and then they had a sort of like an unveiling fundraiser, because they invited people over and they said, look what we've done. We've raised the money to do this on our own as queer Ghanaians. But now we need help to continue this. We need help to make sure that people actually have the resume classes, the cooking classes, and all of that. And there are these groups of people, I think they're mainly funded by right-wing groups in America, who make it their mission to go to all of these countries, not just Africa, in Eastern Europe as well, and to pump money into an anti-LGBTQ agenda, because the sentiment is that they've lost America. So they will come to places like Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, and pump money into several people who are locals to now then go and fight against these things. So in Ghana, we had a person here who took images and pictures from Facebook accounts and social media accounts of the organizers of this. Now, these people didn't go looking for media. They didn't go on television. They didn't go to the newspapers. They merely had a little fundraiser, and they said to their friends, here's what we're doing. And this gentleman and his band of homophobes basically took pictures from their social media account and spun a story that said that this was being funded by the West. I was at that event. There were at least 50 LGBTQ Ghanaians there and 3 Europeans. But the story changed, that, you know, the embassy people from Europe and Australia were pumping money into making a gay center in Ghana. And before you knew it, the story went like wildfire. Churches were involved, and the president sent the military to go shut the center down, barely a week after it had opened. And this is something I think that was new for Ghana, the use of military intervention into what is supposed to have been a safe space for LGBTQ people. And then after that happened, the president went to an event with Christians, and he said very publicly that under his watch, there will be no same-sex marriage allowed in Ghana. Now, mind you, this community people had never asked for marriage equality. They had not even asked for equality under the law. They had just asked to have a safe space where they could be protected when people tossed them out. And this has now been spun into all of this stuff. So the net effect of this is that people who are queer in this country, and maybe we're taking baby steps to go out, have now retreated and feel like they're in a fight for their lives. But unfortunately, this is the country they have. Where would they go? It's not as if, you know, millions of LGBTQ Ghanaians can just pick up and leave this country. This is the country they have. But what we're seeing is that this is a playbook that is used in many different places. It's not new. We saw this in Nigeria. And when you push back a lot, you get things like Nigeria's very, very hateful anti-gay law to lock people up for 14 years. And this is sort of like the push for something like that here in a country that, for all the years I've been coming here, has pretty much been a place where there was no social pogrom against people who were different, because they were just, you know, those gays over there, and it's not a big deal. So that's what's been happening here in Ghana.
No, that sounds quite hectic. I will just move to Michaela. You've been in Germany for a bit now, and one of the things that I really want to know is you do consume German literature, and you know how the literature in that part of the world is. How is queerness or the queer discussion discussed in the literature vis-a-vis in the normal life? That's the question. And I also want to know, what is Stonewall? We keep hearing Stonewall. It seems to be very important.
Okay, I'll start with Stonewall, being chronological about it. Stonewall, 1969. What a year, what a number, 69. 1969 in New York, in Greenwich Village. which was sort of the, it remains the home of the avant-garde in New York, bohemian kind of lifestyle, artist cafes and things like that, and a very significant queer population. Okay, 1969, things came to a head. The police had made several raids on Stonewall. It was a bar, a queer bar, run in the Christopher Street in New York. And Christopher Street is important because usually in Europe, when we talk about gay pride, we say Christopher Street Day celebration. But that's where it all began. The bar was incidentally run by the mafia, and it wasn't the cleanest place in the world. They were only interested in making money. They didn't even have a true sink to wash the glasses and dishes. So people got hepatitis, for example, some Beispiel. And you can say, what is the purpose of the mafia running a bar like that for queers? Well, there were a few queer mafioso who wanted to have a place to get their kicks too. But the primary means of making money there was to blackmail people. You had like Wall Street bankers who didn't want to come out of the closet, and like Stonewall was a place for them to hook up with, for example, call boys. People from poor, from the poor side of life, the wrong side of the tracks, flocking to New York, trying to make money, and being queer themselves, wanting to do whatever was possible to make a buck. You guys know the song "Take a Walk on the Wild Side," where it says he shaved her legs and he was a she. Well, she shaved her legs and he was a she. Well, that's pretty much what it was about. It was about a lot of gay and trans young people coming to New York, trying, and by Marsha P. Johnson, it wasn't any different really. So they would flock to Stonewall to make a little money, to stay warm in the winter nights and so forth. And you had wealthy people, like I said, from Wall Street coming in there, getting the, and I've written several articles about this in German and in English. So the mafia would blackmail them, and at the same time, of course, the mafia was being the mafia was giving bribes to the police. The police took the money and said, "Okay, we'll tell you when we raid next time, so you'll have time to get some of your people out." And it was hardly enough time anyway. And usually the ones who were on the losing end of the deal were people like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, the disempowered BIPOC people there who weren't really warned of the police raids. And Marsha P. Johnson and the others had just had too much. They were just fed up with constantly being taken by the police into the restrooms, being stripped to see if it was, according to the police, a man or a woman. There were laws in New York City against dressing in the clothing of the wrong sex. In the 1960s, in New York City, I'm not talking about somewhere in Kansas, but in New York City too. So there were all kinds of ways to get in trouble, and for people like Marsha P. Johnson, being black too, living while being black was right. So she had just had enough, and she and her colleagues, and they just started a riot. There were white lesbians there, there were Hispanic call boys, there were the rich Wall Street bankers, and like she was at the forefront. She wasn't the only one, but she was at the forefront. In German television last year, I sang an homage to her, a song which I'd written because it would have been her 75th birthday. But at any rate, that was Stonewall. So Stonewall is regarded as being the moment in which the gay rights, the modern gay rights movement was ignited. And when everyone talks about Stonewall, they're going back to 1969 to that bar of the name Stonewall in Greenwich Village. And interesting enough, a connection to Germany. At the turn of the previous century, a German physician by the name of Magnus Hirschfeld had done some very important scientific work advocating the rights of homosexuals. That was, then came 2 world wars came in between, of course, and so the uprising in Stonewall in New York, 1969, was like the reignition of the gay rights movement. That's where it all began for many of us. But I would say it was a long, long way. And if I may shortly add, before getting a question about the German literature, I just wanted to say, regarding what Frankie said, indeed, safe spaces have always been an issue. I'm trying to get my safe face into the safe space here of the camera. Safe space has always been an issue because it wasn't easy growing up here. Like I said, I was the only child in a Catholic family. That was the 1960s. The world was not really open to homosexuality and transsexuality. As we all know here, and as many of our viewers know, if you stand out, you get knocked down. If you stand back up, you get knocked down. So at some point, you start looking for a refuge. And for me, that was literature and things like that. And in terms of German literature, and by the way, it seems that things haven't really changed. In terms of German literature, there's a lot of gay German literature. From Jürgen Bauer, for example, Window to the World, Caroline Imke, The Way We Desire, also those are the English translations, the titles. And when you read that, you see, basically the topics and the themes are the same. People in search of themselves, in search of a safe space, questioning themselves, trying to find solidarity. And what I do, the newspapers I write for, is primarily nonfiction, what I do there, but I write about articles of about matters of great importance to us, write articles about, for example, racism in the LGBT community in Germany. I can expand upon that if you desire. I write about the problems faced here with the growing strength of the far-right parties, too. There's a lot of rollback here due to parties like the AfD. Even though they have homosexual, at least members of their own, but they're usually just like, tokens. Essentially, they speak of homosexuals the way others would have done, 75, 80 years ago. And we know what happened then. In the concentration camps, there were special places for homosexuals. They had to wear like a pink-colored sign on their concentration camp uniforms and things like that. So there's, no matter where you are in this world, there's always kind of this backlash and this tendency to want to roll back. People ask me, how do I look at it? I say, on the one hand, we in the LGBT community are indeed gaining more acceptance. Some of the newspapers I mentioned, which I regularly write columns for, are mainstream newspapers, not milieu, but mainstream. And our topics are topics which interest the mainstream increasingly. So we are gaining increasing acceptance. But the problem is, those who don't like us, they're less in numbers, but they have even less, shall I say, restraints. They feel even more empowered than maybe 20 years ago to express their vitriol, to engage in violence against us because of the acceptance we have in the mainstream. They want to roll back, and so they don't hold back. People are routinely attacked in the subways, in the metro, on street corners here, even in parts of the city of Berlin, for example, which have been deemed to be open, so while their numbers are smaller, they're smaller in comparison to the numbers of those who accept us. They're nevertheless getting more powerful, more violent, and we know what it's like with the internet. That's a breeding ground for hatred and fundamentalism, whether it's religiously motivated or politically. So what I do is try to inform about that, try to keep these issues alive in the mainstream papers, and to talk to our brothers and sisters in the community papers, in the milieu papers too, and be a voice for them. Because if you don't do anything, no one's going to be there for you. And also the problem, even though we are accepted by more and more people, those who accept us, who themselves aren't part of the community, they tend to think, oh, everything's okay now. Like people who are not racist, for example, saying, oh, Obama was elected, there's no more racism or something like that. So they are off of their guard too. And they think that sometimes we're just doing a little bitching, we're just doing a little complaining that everything has to be okay. And so you have to keep these fires burning. You have to keep them alive. And that's what I do with my stories and my performances and so forth. But as to your question about German literature, it's very prolific here. Lots of for gay and lesbians, there are more and more books in this regard, and lots of nonfiction things too being done there.
Are there any from people from writers of African before you ask? I mean, just have a comment here. Zugiso says, "Michaela, why are you lying, fam? You ain't 60." Yeah.
Oh, I love those compliments. I do. Well, I was born in 1961. I sorry to disappoint you, but I really am. But you know the saying, black don't crack. So, we...
Yeah. So I want to ask, like, are there any Africans who are doing the writing of, or African people of writing, or any Black writers who are doing stories on queer narratives apart from yourself?
Well, I will say there are a lot of, if you look on social media, there are a lot of people involved in performances, people of color. So it's kind of a how should I say, a multi-dimensional position here. There's in Berlin, for example, there's an institution known as OU, and there's very active in having people of color, queer people of color, doing multifaceted performances, reading poetry, doing dance, doing short videos and movies and things like that. So a lot of it, in terms of, we'd say, action art, as it were, that's growing there too. It's a growing population, and people are making increased use of the social media to make their points. But more Black and people of color involvement is certainly welcome. Certainly welcome. I'll put it that way. And I'm trying to do my best to encourage it, because we all profit from it. We all profit from it. So I'm trying to do my best to encourage it.
Okay. So I want to chat with Frankie now. Frankie, I know a bit of fiction narratives in African literature. I mean, Jude Dibia, there's this wonderful Behind the Shadows book that came out.
Walking with Shadows.
Walking with Shadows. Walking with Shadows. Why do I Behind with the Shadows was somebody else? Walking with Shadows. Here, this wonderful Walking with Shadows novel. We've had narratives like gay characters in Zugi Savannah's Men of the South. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about these characters, both in either fiction and non-fiction, seeing as you're one of them?
Sure. So just before I forget, you had asked a question about Blacks in German literature, and there is the German Nigerian writer Olumide Popola, who has this wonderful novel called When We Speak of Nothing. I don't know if it's translated in German, but I do know that she's German, and she's done some of that work. So I think for many of us, Jude Dibia's Walking with Shadows was really the first novel that centered our lives. There have been, as you mentioned, books that had us in them, which is wonderful because they're so rare. But Jude Dibia's Walking with Shadows sort of opened the lid for people in Nigeria and I guess in West Africa about queer narratives and centering them as they are. There is also a writer who is Nigerian but now based in South Africa called David Unana Ikwo, who had this book called Fimisile, Forever, which is a love story about it's a love story involving two twins who happen to be gay, living in Nigeria. I think also in South Africa, the singer and the poet Nakene had a book called Piggy Boy Blues that had some elements of LGBT life that were central to the character. And even in a very special book that's coming out in America in August, but it's out in Southern Africa, called The Eternal Audience of One, Remy Ngamidi's book. There is also like aspects of a gay life among us Africans, even though it's not mentioned as gay. But that's one of the things about telling our stories, that sometimes we can just deal with it in description. In nonfiction, we have Unoma Azwa's Embracing My Shadow, and very recently, I think it must have been about 2 or 3 years ago, there was an anthology called She Called Me Woman, which had just basically queer narratives of different people. So I think that for many of us, seeing ourselves in literature slowly and steadily every now and then has been a bit of a joy, because very, very often, if you don't see yourself in the stuff that is available for you to read or even watch, you have this great sense of isolation. And when it comes to discovering your sexuality, whether you're gay or bisexual or thinking about it or being fluid, if you are not in a place where there are examples, having lived in America, I know that it's very different for people who grew up in America, who can easily come to terms with their sexuality, and people who grew up in a culture where it is the norm is heterosexuality, and everything that you do is pushed towards that. You're supposed to go to school and then grow up and then get married, whether you're a man or a woman, but that is sort of like the street that you're on. So if there is nothing that you can pick up in your literature or even in your pop culture film that tells you, these feelings that you have of otherness are not strange, they're not different. There have been people before you who were like this, and there will be people after you who are like that. It makes the isolation quite unbearable for some people, which is why oftentimes you'll see that people who are LGBTQ can be prone to suicide, because very often they feel like that is the way out. And so what I know is that people who grow up now have the internet, and that, with all of its negativity, is also a godsend, because a kid in Kafanchan, a kid in Bolgatanga, a kid in the Cape Flats, who may not even have access to books but has access to the internet, can find stories about people like us, can be able to now go into the library and say to the librarian, do you have a copy of Men of the South? Can be able to do things that it was impossible for them to do before, because now they know that being queer or being gay or being just different is not abnormal, no matter what you're being fed in the pulpit. There are narratives, there are stories, there are things that you can do to figure out how you're going to now deal with this world that you find yourself in, and you have no choice in the matter. In my book, I talk about people who knew they had no choice in the matter, but decided to live a heterosexual lifestyle because it was the only thing they could do. People growing up now don't have to make the choices that my generation made. I mean, they could, but they don't have to, because they know that getting married to somebody of the opposite sex will not make you fall in love with that person. You will continue to go through the motions if your heart is elsewhere. And so for me, the power of storytelling is something that I know makes a difference in people's lives, and it's something that I want to continue doing as much as possible.
If there's anybody in the audience, this is a good time for you to ask any questions you have. I think you might have forgotten Chinelo Paranta there, Frankie.
Yes, of course. My very good friend Chinelo Paranta, who was, for me, which is, her 2 books, basically allowed us to dream, especially Happiness Like Water, because her other book is, is mainly more about war, but then our characters and our lives are in there. And that is sort of like this representation of us, which we rarely ever see. So it is for me, it is a bit of a privilege that I have access in my adulthood to find these African narratives, to find these books. But I know that growing up, I was a person who read, and I didn't see positive narratives about us. So I think that now, people who may not have access to books but have access to the internet know that there are stories out there that they could go find.
There's a question that's bugging me, Michaela. You mentioned that there are laws in Germany as well as in the US, but the laws don't seem to catch up with human behavior. Where as much as you may legislate and have laws that cover people, it doesn't mean that the lifestyle that you live is covered. Do you want to speak to that a bit? Because it's something that bugs me, because we don't have the laws here, but the lives are quite awful as well on the continent, and it looks like it's not much better where you are.
Yeah, that's a hard fact. It's on the books, as it were. It's on the books, and that was one of my frustrations with, after having studied law, realizing that there's this chasm there between reality and what we're striving for. For example, now just as one example, in many of the states within the United States, states which are run by Republicans, even though Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are in office federally, in many of the Republican states, there are moves now to restrict the rights of trans young people, for example, restricting their access to the desired counseling and treatment, whatever they want. We in the trans community are we have many facets, but many people are deciding, increasingly early to undergo the transition, as it were, and many of the states run by Republicans are trying to roll back, trying to make it forbidden to do that, even though the Constitution and the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court, for example, has actually opened up ways for that and actually guarantees that, notwithstanding that these states are taking that tack. And in Germany, well, basically there's opposition on many sides about increasing trans rights. And like I said, some parties here on the right wanting to roll them back. The German Constitution guarantees, essentially the same things as the U.S. Constitution, valuing life and the autonomy of people. But of course, those words were already there at times in which homosexual actions were forbidden. There was this famous paragraph in the German law, in the German criminal code from the era of the emperor, from the era of the German Kaiser. It was paragraph 175, and it basically prohibited homosexual acts and so forth, primarily concentrating on homosexual men, but basically prohibiting that which was deemed to be unnatural. You have this term in German, born on the 17th of May, because you take the numbers 175, from the paragraph of the criminal code at that time, 17, and then 5. So that was like this, using the dates, that was like 17th of May. And that was a way of saying that someone was a homosexual. Not necessarily an insult, actually more of a kind of a laughing kind of thing. Oh, he was born on the 17th of May, or she. And ironically, that's the date in which much of the world has come to celebrate the gay liberation movement, the 17th of May, the United Nations and so forth, So there's a certain irony in that. But essentially, it's a case of us in the LGBT community, notwithstanding the rights which are written there in the constitutions of the land of the countries, it's and in the jurisprudence of the courts. Having that interpreted and respected is another matter, and defending it against people wanting to roll it back is another matter. So yes, officially, we have more rights than we did, let's say, 50 years ago. But unofficially, we have to keep fighting for them, and we have to make sure that people understand you don't let up, you don't look away. So you say it's not all that better here. I would agree with you. I would really and truly agree with you.
So interesting, because in our part of the world, we are just asking, when will we get there as African, sub-Saharan African, LGBTQ people? When will we not be illegal? Even before we get to like rights and all of that, when will we be in a space where much of our continent, we are not deemed illegal simply because we exist?
Exactly.
This is what is happening here in West Africa. And, it is, I can only dream that we will get to a point where all of these countries that I love so much and I travel to have laws protecting us on the books. But until we get there, I think it's important in all of our narratives that we continue to have full-bodied, full throttle, multi-dimensional depictions of ourselves, and that includes our LGBT selves that are not
I just wanted
not caricatures of who we are.
Okay, I just wanted to bring in a comment here from Whim Gliders. She's talking about
South Africa.
The importance of queer cartoons such as Steven Universe, making people seen. Thank you, Whim Gliders. There's another one here about, it's amazing to see more authors creating stories that resonate with marginalized individuals. Representation is so important. Do you have any questions to ask each other, by the way? I want to.
I do. I'd like to ask Frankie a question, or a couple of questions. One urgent question: the situation you described with the raiding of the queer spaces and so forth. In those countries, in those jurisdictions, how is the tolerance? Is there any tolerance of queer literature? Are there any means of censoring what's written, the beautiful things that people like you write? Are there any actions taken to censor that, to stop this from spreading, either in printed books or on the internet and so forth?
Well, I think we're sort of lucky here in West Africa, in Nigeria and Ghana, the two countries on this coast that I know so well. That there has been no interruption with access to books. The problem we have is getting the gatekeepers to allow those narratives to be published. I mean, what is the use of writing a story that is a queer story, but then you cannot get a publisher to do it because the reasoning is that there is no business for it. So very often, I think that there are many wonderful men and women, my brothers and sisters, who are trying to write stories and write books in our part of the world, but the publishers don't quite see it. They don't quite see that these stories would not just make a difference, but would make good business sense. And a lot, unfortunately, in this area where I am, a lot of the books that actually make a splash, even the ones that have queer content, have to be published outside the continent before our local publishers want to now engage with that. So we are fighting a war on many different fronts. I really, in my heart, believe that we are readers here. And if we make it possible for people to have the content, they will digest it and they will enjoy it. Everybody in this parts has read parts of the Bible or parts of the Quran. We can make space for great nonfiction and great fiction, and make it accessible to people. But that is a struggle, and there are things happening to make it a little bit easier for people to have access to books. One of them is the Ake Arts and Book Festival that's held every year in Lagos. Another one is the Paja Book Festival that's held here in Ghana every single year. So there are efforts to try to get people access to books and access to knowledge, including books that have content that is not mainstream.
Great. That's good to hear that there are these perspectives. By the way, as a means of combating the very fundamentalistic conservative viewpoints, for example, in the USA, you were there, you know what kinds of views there are too there with right-wing Christians, or they call themselves Christians and so forth. When they are trying to roll back civil rights and gay rights and so forth, the cancel culture has reached the point at which large corporations are saying, hey, we don't want to be a part of it. If you're going to have this law in your state saying who could go to the bathroom, or, you know, whether a kid could wear a gender fluid clothing or clothing of the, in quotation marks, other sex, if you're going to enact things like that, we're not going to do business in your state anymore. We're going to pull out and things like that. And that's, if they would only succeed in doing that with some of the cable networks, like Fox News, for example. But that's increasingly a weapon which is being used. So the economic weapon of the right to freely invest and divest and say, hey, if you're doing those things in your country or that state, whatever, we're not going to be present there. It's always a question of who's really hurt by it, whom is intended to hurt, and so forth. Whether you look at, for example, the apartheid, the ban on South Africa, embargo against South Africa during apartheid, and these and that, and you can debate that. But essentially, people are saying in the corporations, well, they're always motivated by money. They're saying, hey, it doesn't look good. And then you have people there who are also motivated by what's right and what's wrong, and they're saying you can't do this. And that's so being increasingly used as a weapon of trying. It's a form of extra parliamentary measures, if you will, but it might be one possibility. Boycotting, embargoes, things like that. And I find it interesting you saying that publishing is done outside of these countries. I think that it's very important that those areas, those countries which are relative safe spaces, should show solidarity.
Like where?
Yeah, that's
like
the question.
Where is a safe space?
They're starting to disappear.
So that I can pack my bags and go. Where is a safe space for us?
I
think in all seriousness, I think that we give too much attention to the few companies that say we're going to use an economic cudgel. We haven't really seen it work. We've seen people talk about it, but we have not really seen real change. I mean, I think that the whole world lived through 4 years of Donald Trump trying to roll back everything. And all of these companies that now say X, Y, and Z in the last couple of months were companies that made money over the last 4 years. And they did not pull out of states that had these nasty bathroom laws. You know? I think that we have to be able to say, this is nice that you're trying to do this now, but how long is this really sustainable for a company to say, you know, if you do X, Y, and Z, we're not going to do that, because we haven't really seen it work. I mean, we're starting to see a little bit of it in Georgia, but I don't think we have enough data to show that these people, you know, some movie people have pulled out, yes. But a lot of these companies, whether it's Delta, whether it's Coca-Cola, whether these are major brands that have a lot of influence outside of just giving a nice statement and saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z, we've not really seen them actually say we're leaving.
Well, I agree with you, and that's why we have to put the pressure on. Look at Black Lives Matter. When it began several years ago, it was initially a footnote in the history, and now it's marching forward. But I agree with you, it's not easy. It's not easy.
I want to ask you a question, Frankie. Yeah?
Yes.
How was it to get your book? Because I was able to see the whole queer community space, not just as a community, but, you know, from when you're a younger person through your teenage life, how did you get? How was the process for getting this book to be alive, to be with us?
You mean business-wise or writing it?
The writing it.
Oh, so I had to I started off as trying to do a very good piece of nonfiction journalism, but I realized very, very early on in the process that it would not make sense for me to be talking about all these lives, from a distant place. I had to really look inward. And, I'm not someone, I've been trained as a journalist, which means that my training tells me that I'm not the story. I have to go out and get other people's story. This is not about me. But in doing this particular kind of work, I had written stories and magazine articles, and they did not have the impact that I wanted them to have. And so I really had to discuss with friends and my agent as to how best to tell the story. And the everyone's conclusion was that you have to tell your own story. You can't be talking about this friend of yours doing X, Y, and Z and this kind of struggle, but you are glossing over or not even mentioning your own individual struggles at home, your own struggles in New York as a lonely African, your own struggles trying to make it at work and having all of these blockades. And so for me, when I understood that for me to get at the heart of the story, I had to talk about myself as well as my friends. It became a lot easier for me to write coherently in a way that made sense, because I could look back at my own history. I could go back and talk to my family members. My parents were alive at the time I was writing. I could have conversations about the things that I thought and what they thought about the same incident. And I used sort of reporting techniques that I would use in reporting about others, except turning the mirror on myself and my family. And so that was how I was able to, have a work that I felt was a little bit more complete than telling the story from a removed place from other people. Now, the business end of it, again, is a whole different thing, because it's like, again, publishers publish books so that they can sell them. And so there was always the question, is like, well, who's going to buy this book? Why would anybody want to read this book? And as a writer, I think you never really get used to all the rejection that come with your work, or the skepticism that comes with people looking at what you're trying to do and saying, I don't think that's going to work for us. But at some point, you have to say to yourself that this is bigger than you. And you have to keep pushing, and you have to keep plugging away. Absolutely. And that's, essentially what I did. I mean, my driving goal was to not have any journalist, whether foreign or local, come to our part of the world and run with the prepackaged story that 99% of our population is homophobic, that everybody is lockstep in line with criminalizing gay people, and that we basically are this minuscule minority that does not really exist in people's lives and people's families. And that was my goal. I was like, if you have a counter narrative that feels authentic, then people have something to look at, and then maybe that would be a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you, Wild FN, Muronziki, and Vicky Kamau for commenting. Abubakar has a question. One of you, yes. Hi, Abubakar. One of you lives in the US and the other one lives in Germany, where there have been histories of race issues. The question is, what does it mean for you being Black and queer, and how important is your art in negotiating these identities?
Okay. I was born in the States. I spent half of my life in Europe. I live in Berlin, and no matter where I am, I'm always reminded of the fact that I'm queer and that I'm Black. How could I forget that? But I grew up in the States, and I developed something of a thick skin in this regard. I'm not easy to push around in that respect, which surprises some people here in Germany, because if you compare the ratio of Blacks in the U.S. to to the entire population is much greater than here, of course. And so they're not necessarily used to Black people asserting themselves here like I do, journalistically and in the arts and in everyday life. You know, if I'm going, standing on the street corner and I hear the N-word, I tend to make an issue of it. I mean, of course, you develop kind of like a triage. The things which you say, it has to bounce off of me. Otherwise, you'd be constantly involved in educating the ignorant. You don't. If you argue with a fool, you look like a fool yourself. But at some point, it rises, to the point of saying, "Hey, that's not the way to do that." So anyone who knows me knows that I always fight back. Based upon the principles of law and justice. And some people in Europe aren't necessarily used to a Black person standing up like that. For me, it's normal. Like I said, I grew up in the 60s. I was barely 10 years old. I was wearing a button on my clothing saying "Free Angela Davis," and so it's activism was always there for me. If I wanted it or not, I had to assert myself. At the same time, in terms of my queerness, I had to protect myself because let's be honest about it. There is in the Black community, there are pockets of resistance to LGBTQ lifestyles. And so sometimes you're doubly discriminated against, and even in the community you were hoping would be sensitized towards helping marginalized people. But that's the experience that I have, and I take it with me. I wear it proudly. I'm Black, I'm proud. I'm queer, I'm proud. I don't try to hide myself. And I don't see any alternatives to that.
Frankie?
I think for me, it's slightly different because I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I did not move to America until I was perhaps 20 years old. And I had to, as a professional Black man working in media, you have to navigate issues of race in New York. It's just the way it is. But I did make a conscious choice, I think when I was 25 or 26, that I was also not going to be in. I was going to make it very clear, if you were in my world, that I was a gay person and I was an African gay person, and I would navigate all the things that came with it in a professional setting. So obviously, I never led with my gayness, but it was never something that was hidden. And as an immigrant, you have to always think about this wonderful career that I was having in America. Would I have that in Nigeria if I was out? How different would my life be when my friends were getting married and telling me, oh, that promotion that you got, I can't get that unless I have a wife. So I had to, it's almost like, speaking 3 or 4 languages, depending on the room that you walk in. You have to be professional. You cannot be the loud, angry Black person. And then you can't be the loud, angry queer person on top of all that if you want to be known for the quality of your work in the newsroom or in the classroom, as opposed to what it is that you are intrinsically. So I always try to do good work, but not at the expense of hiding who I am. But I also knew that I was quite fortunate because at 25, I don't think that I would have had the courage if I worked at the Daily Times in Nigeria to be out. I probably would have fallen in line. I probably would have gotten married to try to become an editor or whatever. And I don't know how that would have turned out for me. I don't think it would have turned out very well. But I do have friends who did that and are still doing that. And they are navigating all of these things, which for me seems to be a lot. But living in America as a person of color, in a professional setting is complicated. Now I live in Ghana, I live in Accra, And I think that working here, I'm able to bring all of the different experiences that I have had working in the West to create an environment that is safe for all the people that work around me and work with me, and let them know that whatever they bring into the office, who they are authentically is who they are, and how they navigate that space outside, their identity is no barrier to progress in the office. But this comes from experience. Experience I would not have had if I had to diminish my true self to try to have a career at home. So now returning to West Africa and trying to have a career here with experience, I can now say to myself, I can look at the young people that work around me and say to them, you are welcome, whoever you are. Your weirdness, your quirkiness, whatever you think you are, whatever you're questioning, whatever identity that you have, it is okay.
You're beautiful.
The only thing I require of you is that you do great work, so that you are not judged by anything else except the quality of the work that you're doing. So, yeah.
Thank you, Abubakar. Thank you for those questions, guys. So my last question for you.
Even more beautiful. Thank you for the
yeah,
question.
Yes. So my last question for you guys is this is a point where you tell us, where I can get. Yes. Then I want to know what next you have for us. Do you have any new work that you want us to check out? Whether it's a book, whether it's maybe a work with the NYU that we need to be checking out now.
So I'm always working on new stuff. So whenever it is ready to be presented to the world, I will tell you first. But one of the other things that I run the Ghana campus of New York University. And one of the things that I'm trying to do with my time here is to have public dialogues of artists and writers, and to make sure that our stories are being told. So one of the things that we're doing is next week we have a public dialogue with a singer, songwriter, filmmaker called One Love the Cubala, who is just such a wonderful, interesting cultural touchstone in our part of the world, and makes us proud to be African with the things that he's doing. And I want to be able to use my limited platform as the head of a university campus here to bring these kinds of conversations to life. So I'd ask everybody who is free to join us on the live stream on Facebook at NYU Accra next Thursday at 5 p.m. GMT for a wonderful conversation. And while I live here, I'm going to try my best to continue to bring writers from all across our wonderful continent who are doing great things to have public conversations, because we can all learn from each other. It's not easy in the era of the pandemic, but I am a teacher now. So by nature, I'm hopeful. I'm an optimistic person. Even when things are really rough, I try to always see the silver lining. So I really believe that in a few months or in a year, despite all of the sadness that we've all endured, that better days are coming, and that I will be able to have wonderful artists and writers come to Ghana and bless us with their work.
Including Michaela, perhaps?
Of course. Dr. Michaela, to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
I appreciate the work you're doing. Things I have on my calendar, I have some television appearances here in Germany about diversity coming up for the Diversity Month celebrations in May. And I do I make a lot of speeches here in terms of intersectionality, justice, racial and sexual justice, feminism, and so forth. And I will be intensifying those. I worked together with the German Rail Corporation, which was making very, very great strides in terms of diversity, in terms of LGBTQ issues and so forth. I work with them as an external advisor, and we have a lot of things planned, and just continue writing my articles about what's going on. Empowerment is a major issue of mine, and letting people know they don't have to take that. As I say, quoting another song of mine now, as I say, be loud, be proud. Don't let anything cloud the rainbow in your heart and in the sky. And that's true. And it's a rainbow. It's a beautiful thing. That's that silver lining for us. A beautiful multicolored thing. People of all colors of this planet coming together it might be utopian, but I love physics and astrophysics. I love practical things, and I'd say, is that utopian? That would be the most practical thing that we could ever acquire, is people coming together, accepting one another, tolerance in its true sense, tolerance in permitting participation instead of just being simply tolerated until you do something wrong and then they say, see, I told you they're like that. But giving people a real chance, including in the LGBT community, including the other marginalized communities. That's what I'm about. I am the angry Black woman. I channel my anger into informing people, and it's nice having a forum like this. Thanks to all those involved here, having a forum like this and meeting you guys at this wonderful place.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to Frankfurt Buchmesse for putting this all together. So
exactly. All those involved, the Foreign Office, the Buchmesse, and the wonderful viewers here online.
Thank you for those who logged in. Thank you, Wim Gliders, for this has been awesome. It's been awesome to have you, Wim Gliders, and everybody else who streamed in. I want to say thank you very much to the Frankfurter Buchmesse, who have been very important for this process, and for the German Federal Foreign Office for funding this process. And I'd like to say thank you to my guests, Frankie and Dr. Michaela. Thank you so much for joining me and joining us for the last 1 hour. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say goodbye for now, and I hope you have a wonderful evening or afternoon, wherever you are, and cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And stay healthy. Cheers. Stay healthy. Thank you.